Imagine for a second that you're the crown prince of one of the richest countries on earth. You wake up in a palace with more rooms than a shopping mall. You have a yacht that has a smaller yacht inside it. Your country sits on an ocean of liquid gold worth trillions of dollars. Life is good. Life is very good. But then one morning, you look at a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet shows you something terrifying. The thing that made your country rich, the only thing that made your country rich, is dying. Not tomorrow, not next year, but soon enough that you can see the cliff approaching. And when you go over that cliff, your kingdom doesn't just get poorer, it collapses, it burns, it ceases to exist. So you do what any rational person would do. You panic. And then you come up with the most ambitious, most expensive, most audacious plan in modern economic history. You're going to build a new economy from scratch. You're going to replace oil with tourism, tech, and finance. You're going to build cities in the desert. You're going to build a ski resort where it's 50 degrees Celsius in summer. You're going to build a skyscraper 170 kilometers long. This isn't science fiction. This is Saudi Arabia. This is Vision 2030. And this is the story of what happens when an entire country realizes that their business model is obsolete and they have maybe 10 years to reinvent themselves before the money runs out. Welcome to the most expensive midlife crisis in human history. Today, we're diving deep into Saudi Arabia's desperate race against time. We're going to look at why oil is dying faster than anyone expected, why the mega projects are actually going broke, and why Mohammed bin Salman might be the most terrified billionaire on the planet. Buckle up. This is going to be a wild ride through the desert. 1. The oil addiction. How to build a country on quicksand. Let's start with the drug. Oil, black gold, Texas tea. For the last 80 years, Saudi Arabia has been the world's dealer. They pump it out of the ground for about $10 a barrel and sell it for $70, $80, sometimes $100. The profit margins are obscene. It's basically free money. Here's the problem. Oil currently accounts for roughly 40% of Saudi Arabia's GDP. It's about 70% of export revenue, and it's nearly 90% of government income. Read that again. 90%. If oil revenue disappeared tomorrow, the Saudi government would have to cut 90% of its budget. That's not an economy. That's a hostage situation. Now you might be thinking, but wait, isn't the world still using oil? Aren't we driving cars, flying planes, making plastics? Yes, but the trajectory is clear. Peak oil demand is coming, not peak supply. Peak demand. The world is moving toward electric vehicles, renewable energy, and efficiency improvements. Every year we need a little less oil than the year before. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, estimates that global oil demand will peak sometime between 2025 and 2030. After that, it's a slow decline. By 2050, demand could be 30 to 50% lower than today. That's not a crisis. That's an extinction event for a country that produces nothing else. But here's the darker truth. Saudi Arabia knows this. They've known it for years. And they're terrified, because oil isn't just their economy. It's their social contract. It's the deal that keeps the kingdom stable. The Saudi government doesn't tax its citizens. Instead, it gives them free healthcare, free education, subsidized electricity, subsidized fuel, and cushy government jobs that pay well for doing very little. In exchange, the citizens don't ask for democracy, freedom of speech, or women's rights. It's a trade. Wealth for obedience. But if the oil money dries up, the deal breaks. The government can't pay for the subsidies. They can't create the jobs. The youth get angry. And angry youth in the Middle East tend to do things that kings don't like. Things involving revolutions. Saudi Arabia has a demographic time bomb. 70% of the population is under 35. These kids didn't grow up in the desert. They grew up on Instagram. They've seen the world. They want jobs. They want opportunities. They want a future. And if the government can't provide that, they'll burn the whole thing down. This is why Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the crown prince and de facto ruler, launched Vision 2030. It's not a development plan. It's a survival strategy. He's trying to wean the country off oil before the oil runs out, or more accurately, before the world stops buying it. But here's the problem. Building a new economy is hard. really hard, and it's even harder when you're starting from scratch in the middle of a desert. 2. The Neom madness, when megalomania meets economics. Alright, let's talk about the crown jewel of Vision 2030, the project that's supposed to save Saudi Arabia. The thing that's so ambitious, so insane, that when MBS first announced it, people thought it was a joke. Neom, the $500 billion mega-city in the desert. Except it's not just a city. It's a collection of fever dreams wrapped in marketing jargon. Let me give you the highlights. The line. A linear city, not a circular city, not a grid, a straight line, 170 kilometers long, 200 meters wide, and 500 meters tall. 2 parallel mirrored skyscrapers stretching across the desert. It will house 9 million people. There will be no cars, no roads, just high-speed trains and flying taxis. You can walk from one end to the other in... Wait, no you can't. It's 170 kilometers. But the promotional video says you can access everything you need within a 5-minute walk. How? Magic, apparently. Trojena, a mountain ski resort in Saudi Arabia, where summer temperatures hit 50 degrees Celsius. They're going to build an outdoor ski slope at 2,600 meters elevation and somehow maintain snow. They say it will host the 2029 Asian Winter Games. I'll believe it when I see it. Oxagon, a floating industrial city in the shape of an octagon because why not? It's supposed to be the world's largest floating structure. It will have advanced manufacturing, clean energy and a port. It will revolutionize logistics. Or it will sink. One of the two. And let's not forget Sindala, a luxury island resort that will have fancy hotels, a yacht marina, and presumably a helipad for influencers. This is Neom, and it's the most expensive infrastructure project in human history. The original budget was $500 billion. Current estimates, over $1 trillion. And that's probably still low. Now let's talk about the problems. And there are so many problems. Problem 1, physics. Building a 170-kilometer-long skyscraper in the desert is not just ambitious. It's thermodynamically insane. The structure will create its own weather system. The heat island effect will be catastrophic. The energy required to cool it will be astronomical. Engineers have been screaming about this since day one, but MBS doesn't care. He wants the line, so he's getting the line. Problem 2, money. Where is $1 trillion going to come from? The Saudi Public Investment Fund, the PIF, is leading the project. But the PIF doesn't have $1 trillion lying around. They have about $700 billion in assets, and most of that is already committed to other projects, so they need foreign investment. And foreign investors are skeptical, to put it mildly. Problem 3, people. Neom is supposed to house 9 million people by 2045, but who's going to live there? It's in the middle of nowhere. There's no existing infrastructure, no existing economy, no reason for anyone to move there unless the government forces them. And even then, why would a talented engineer or entrepreneur choose Neom over Dubai, Singapore, or London? The current population of Neom? About 2,000, mostly construction workers. The government is trying to attract businesses by offering tax breaks, but so far the interest has been lukewarm at best. Problem 4. The locals. Neom is being built on land that was home to the Hawaitat tribe. The Saudi government forcibly evicted them. When some resisted, they were arrested. At least one was sentenced to death. This isn't development, this is displacement with a marketing budget. Despite all this, construction is happening. Slowly, expensively, but happening. The question is, will it ever be finished? Or will it become the world's most expensive abandoned project, a monument to hubris in the sand? Let me ask you, would you move to a city in the Saudi desert, where summers are lethal, and the nearest real city is 500 kilometers away? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. 3. The tourist gamble. Come for the history, stay because you're in jail. Okay, so Neom is a moonshot. MBS knows that. So he's also betting on something more traditional, tourism. Saudi Arabia wants to attract 100 million tourists a year by 2030. For context, they had about 18 million in 2023. and most of those were religious pilgrims going to Mecca, so they need to 5 times their tourism in 7 years, in a country that, until 2019, didn't even issue tourist visas. Let's talk about the challenges. Saudi Arabia is not an obvious tourist destination. It's hot, it's conservative, alcohol is banned, public displays of affection can get you arrested. Women were only allowed to drive in 2018. The country has a reputation for, let's say, questionable human rights practices. But MBS is trying to rebrand. He's opened the country to tourists. He's allowed mixed-gender concerts. He's building luxury resorts on the Red Sea. He's promoting archaeological sites like Alula, which is genuinely stunning. He even hosted a WWE event because nothing says modern progressive society like scripted wrestling. The Red Sea project is the centerpiece. It's a luxury tourism development covering 28,000 square kilometers of coastline and islands. Think Maldives, but in Saudi Arabia. The plan is to build 50 resorts, attract the ultra-wealthy, and position Saudi Arabia as a high-end tourism destination. Here's the problem. The competition is fierce. Dubai is right next door and already dominates the luxury tourism market in the Gulf. Egypt has the pyramids. Jordan has Petra. What does Saudi Arabia have that they don't? Oil money to burn on marketing, apparently. And then there's the reputation issue. In 2018, journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The CIA concluded that MBS personally ordered the killing. The international backlash was severe. Celebrities, business leaders and politicians distanced themselves from the kingdom. The Davos in the Desert conference became a ghost town. MBS has been trying to rehabilitate his image ever since. He's hosted Formula One races, LIV golf tournaments backed by billions in Saudi money, and even tried to buy major football clubs. It's called sports washing, using sports to clean up your reputation. But here's the thing. Tourists have long memories, and most people, when planning a vacation, don't think, you know where I want to go? The country that dismembered a journalist. The tourism goal of 100 million visitors by 2030 is not just ambitious, it's delusional. Even if they build the resorts, even if they spend billions on marketing, the cultural and political barriers are enormous. This isn't Dubai. Dubai was a blank canvas. Saudi Arabia has decades of baggage. 4. The sovereign wealth spending spree. Buying the future, one meme stock at a time. If you can't build a new economy domestically, maybe you can just buy one. That's the logic behind Saudi Arabia's most aggressive play, the Public Investment Fund. The PF is Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund. It currently manages about $700 billion in assets. That makes it one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world, though still smaller than Norway's $1.6 trillion fund. But unlike Norway, which invests conservatively in global stocks and bonds, Saudi Arabia is swinging for the fences. The PIF has been on a shopping spree. They've bought stakes in Uber, Lucid Motors, Magic Leap, and even a 5% stake in Nintendo. They invested $45 billion in SoftBank's Vision Fund. They bought Newcastle United Football Club in the English Premier League. They're funding LIV Golf to compete with the PGA Tour. They even bought a majority stake in SNK, the company that makes fighting games. The strategy is clear. Diversify away from oil. Invest in technology, entertainment, and sports. Build a portfolio that generates returns even if oil goes to zero. But here's the problem. A lot of these investments are not great. Lucid Motors, the electric vehicle company that was supposed to be the Tesla killer, is hemorrhaging cash. Magic Leap, the augmented reality startup, was a spectacular flop. SoftBank's Vision Fund lost billions on WeWork and other disasters. The PIF isn't investing like a disciplined fund manager. It's investing like a desperate gambler doubling down on long shots. And that makes sense because they are desperate. They don't have the luxury of slow, steady returns. They need wins, big wins, now. But throwing money at startups and sports teams doesn't build an economy. It builds a portfolio. And a portfolio doesn't employ Saudi youth. It doesn't create industries. It doesn't replace oil. There's also a political problem. Every time the PIF buys something controversial, like Newcastle United or LIV Golf, there's backlash. accusations of sports washing, protests from human rights groups. The Saudi brand is toxic in many parts of the world, and no amount of money can fully wash that away. The PIF is a hedge. It's MBS saying, if Vision 2030 fails, at least we'll have some foreign assets to live off. But it's not a solution, it's a parachute. And parachutes only work if you pull the cord before you hit the ground. 5. The unemployment crisis. Too many princes, not enough jobs. Let's talk about the elephant in the palace. Unemployment, specifically youth unemployment. In Saudi Arabia, roughly 30% of people aged 15 to 24 are unemployed. That's not a typo. Nearly 1 in 3 young Saudis can't find a job. How is this possible in a country that's supposedly rich? Simple. The economy is broken. For decades, the Saudi government created millions of public sector jobs to keep people happy. Cushy government positions where you show up, drink tea and collect a paycheck. It was the social contract. The government employed you and you stayed loyal. But the private sector? Barely exists. Why would a Saudi citizen work in the private sector for less money and longer hours when they could get a government job? They wouldn't, so the private sector became dominated by foreign workers. Indians, Pakistanis, Filipinos, Bangladeshis. They do the real work for a fraction of the cost. This created a 2-tier economy. Saudis in air-conditioned offices doing nothing. Foreigners in the heat doing everything. It worked as long as oil prices were high and the government could afford to employ everyone. But now, oil revenues are volatile. The government budget is strained. They can't keep creating fake jobs forever. So they launched Saudization policies, requiring private companies to hire a certain percentage of Saudi nationals. The problem? Most Saudis don't want those jobs. They don't want to work in retail or hospitality or construction. Those jobs are beneath them. There's a cultural issue here. Work, especially manual work, is seen as degrading. It's for the foreigners. Saudis are supposed to be managers, not labourers. But you can't have an economy where everyone is a manager, and no one does the actual work. MBS knows this. He's trying to change the culture. He's cut subsidies. He's introduced a value-added tax, a VAT. He's trying to force Saudis to accept the reality that the free ride is over. But culture doesn't change overnight, especially when you're telling a generation that grew up in luxury that they now need to get their hands dirty. And here's the scary part. Unemployed, educated young men in the Middle East are a powder keg. These are the people who joined ISIS. These are the people who launched the Arab Spring. If MBS can't give them jobs and hope, they will find something else to believe in. And it won't be Vision 2030. The clock is ticking, and the unemployment numbers aren't improving fast enough. 6. The woman question. Half the population, zero trust. Here's a question. How do you build a modern economy when you've spent the last century treating half your population like property? Until recently, women in Saudi Arabia couldn't drive, couldn't travel without male permission, couldn't open a bank account, couldn't go to a stadium. They were legally children, regardless of age. MBS has changed some of this. Women can now drive. They can travel independently. They can attend concerts and sporting events. There are women in the workforce, in government, even in the military. On paper, it looks like progress. But scratch the surface and it's still a deeply patriarchal society. Women are expected to wear abayas in public. The male guardianship system, while weakened, still exists in practice. Women who speak out, like Lujan al-Hathlul, are arrested, tortured and imprisoned. Here's the economic problem. Women make up roughly 50% of the population, but only about 30% of the workforce. That's a massive waste of human capital. If Saudi Arabia wants to compete globally, it needs to utilize its entire population. But that requires a cultural revolution that MBS isn't willing or able to force. There's also the trust issue. Women in Saudi Arabia have been betrayed before. Reforms are announced, then quietly rolled back. Activists are released, then rearrested. There's no rule of law protecting these gains. If MBS decides tomorrow that the reforms are politically inconvenient, he can reverse them with a decree. So, women are in a limbo, more free than before but not truly free. Expected to work and contribute but not trusted with full autonomy. It's a half measure, and half measures don't build modern economies. Compare this to the UAE, particularly Dubai. Women there have far more freedom and economic participation, and it shows. The UAE is thriving. Saudi Arabia is still struggling to get women into entry-level jobs. If Vision 2030 is going to succeed, women need to be full participants. Not because it's morally right, though it is, but because the math doesn't work otherwise. You can't replace oil revenue with half your population sidelined. 7. The debt problem. Burning through the savings account. Let's talk about money. Real money. Not the projected trillions from tourism and tech that haven't materialized. Actual cash. Saudi Arabia's foreign reserves peaked at about $740 billion in 2014 when oil prices were over $100 a barrel. Then oil crashed. By 2020, reserves had dropped to about $440 billion. They've recovered slightly, but the burn rate is alarming. Why? Because the government budget is a disaster. Saudi Arabia needs oil to be at roughly $80 to $90 a barrel just to balance the budget. Anything below that, they run a deficit, and they've been running deficits for years. To cover the gap, they've been doing two things. 1, drawing down reserves. 2, issuing debt. Saudi Arabia's public debt has exploded from nearly zero in 2014 to over $300 billion today. That's about 30% of GDP. Not catastrophic yet, but the trajectory is terrifying. And remember, this is during the building phase of Vision 2030. They're spending hundreds of billions on Neom, the Red Sea project, and other mega projects. None of these are profitable yet. They won't be profitable for years, if ever. So the debt keeps growing. Here's the nightmare scenario. Oil demand peaks. Prices soften. Saudi revenue drops. But they're locked into these massive construction projects that they can't stop without looking like failures. So they keep borrowing, the debt grows, the interest payments eat into the budget. They have to cut subsidies further, which angers the population. Social unrest grows, foreign investors flee, the whole thing spirals. MBS is playing a game of chicken with time itself. He's betting that he can finish enough of Vision 2030 to generate new revenue streams before the oil money runs out. But what if he's wrong? What if Neom never attracts those 9 million residents? What if tourism plateaus at 30 million instead of 100 million? What if the investments in tech startups don't pay off? Then Saudi Arabia becomes a detonation with a half-finished futuristic city rusting in the desert. A cautionary tale about what happens when you try to build the future on credit. Norway avoided this by saving their oil money. Saudi Arabia is spending theirs, and spending it fast. 8. The geopolitical tightrope. Everyone's friend, no one's ally. Let's zoom out. Saudi Arabia isn't just fighting an economic battle, it's fighting a geopolitical one, and it's playing a very dangerous game. For decades, Saudi Arabia's foreign policy was simple: align with the United States. America provides military protection. Saudi Arabia provides oil and regional stability. It was a clear transactional relationship, but the world is changing. America is producing its own oil now through fracking. It's less dependent on the Middle East. China, meanwhile, is the world's largest oil importer. And China doesn't care about human rights or democracy. It just wants oil and influence. So Saudi Arabia is hedging. MBS is courting both Washington and Beijing. He's selling oil to China, buying Chinese technology, and even considering accepting yuan for oil payments instead of dollars. But he's also buying American weapons, hosting American troops, and joining the Abraham Accords to normalize relations with Israel, which the US strongly supports. This is a tightrope walk, and the risk is that Saudi Arabia ends up trusted by neither. America sees them cozying up to China. China sees them still tied to America, and both are asking the same question. When push comes to shove, whose side are you on? There's also the regional problem. Saudi Arabia's main rival is Iran. They're fighting a Cold War that occasionally turns hot, like in Yemen. The Yemeni civil war, which Saudi Arabia has been bombing for nearly a decade, is a humanitarian disaster and a financial drain. Billions of dollars spent on a war they're not winning. And then there's Israel. The Abraham Accords were supposed to lead to normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But after October 2023 and the Gaza war, that normalization is politically toxic. MBS can't be seen shaking hands with Netanyahu while Palestinians are dying. The Saudi street, still conservative and pro-Palestinian, would explode. Geopolitics is expensive. Every ally demands something. Every rival drains resources. And Saudi Arabia, for all its wealth, is still a mid-sized power trying to punch above its weight. Vision 2030 requires stability. It requires foreign investment, tourists, and trade. But stability is hard to maintain when you're playing everyone against each other. 9. The climate irony. Building the future by selling the past. Let's talk about the elephant-sized irony at the heart of Vision 2030. Saudi Arabia's entire plan to transition away from oil is being funded by selling more oil. Think about that for a second. The world is moving toward renewable energy specifically to stop buying oil. And Saudi Arabia's response is to pump more oil, make as much money as possible, and use that money to build a post-oil economy before demand collapses. It's a logical strategy, but it's also deeply hypocritical. Saudi Arabia shows up at climate conferences like COP28, which they actually hosted, and talks about sustainability while simultaneously lobbying to delay fossil fuel phase-outs. They want the world to keep buying oil long enough for them to finish their transition. After that, the world can go green. It's the ultimate got mine mentality, and the rest of the world is catching on. Climate activists call it greenwashing. They point out that Saudi Arabia has some of the highest per capita carbon emissions in the world, that Neom, despite the green marketing, will require massive amounts of energy to build and operate. There's also a technical problem. Saudi Arabia is investing heavily in renewable energy. They're building solar farms and wind projects. The goal is to generate 50% of their electricity from renewables by 2030. But here's the irony. They're doing this to free up more oil for export. They don't want to burn oil domestically because they can sell it abroad for profit. It's not about saving the planet, it's about maximizing revenue. And the world knows it, which makes Saudi Arabia's attempts to position itself as a green leader ring hollow. They're not transitioning away from fossil fuels out of principle. They're doing it because the market is forcing them to. The climate transition is going to happen with or without Saudi cooperation. The question is whether Saudi Arabia can adapt fast enough to survive it. 10. The succession crisis. What happens when MBS is gone? Here's a question nobody wants to ask out loud. What happens if Mohammed bin Salman fails? Or worse, what happens if he succeeds but then dies or is removed from power? Vision 2030 is not a national project. It's MBS's project. He is the one driving it. He is the one making the decisions. He is the one crushing dissent and forcing through reforms. Without him, does Vision 2030 survive? Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. Power is concentrated in the hands of one man, currently King Salman, who is 89 and in declining health. MBS is the crown prince and the de facto ruler. When the king dies, MBS becomes king. But what if he doesn't? What if there's a succession crisis? What if the royal family, which has thousands of members, decides they don't like MBS and back someone else? MBS has made enemies, lots of them. He purged rivals in 2017 during the so-called anti-corruption campaign, where princes were locked up in the Ritz-Carlton until they handed over their assets. He centralized power in a way that broke traditional power-sharing norms in the royal family. He's authoritarian, ruthless, and, according to many, unstable. If MBS falls, Vision 2030 could collapse overnight. The mega-projects could be abandoned. The reforms could be reversed. The country could slide back into traditional conservatism, or worse, descend into internal conflict. And even if MBS stays in power, what's his succession plan? He's 39 years old. He could rule for another 40 years, but absolute power corrupts, and absolute power for 40 years creates a paranoid dictator. Will MBS in 2065 still be the reformer of 2025? Or will he become a tyrant clinging to power, having squandered the oil wealth on vanity projects? The lack of institutional stability is a fundamental weakness. Vision 2030 is not embedded in law or culture. It's embedded in one man's ambition, and one man can fail. 11. Final thoughts. the verdict from the desert. So where does this leave us? Is Vision 2030 going to work? Here's the honest answer. Some of it will, some of it won't. And the question is whether the parts that work will be enough to save the country. Neom? Probably not, at least not at the scale promised. It will be scaled back, rebranded, and turned into something smaller and more realistic. The line will become a marketing brochure, not a reality. Tourism? Maybe. Saudi Arabia has the money to build world-class resorts. If they can overcome the reputation problem and attract 40 to 50 million tourists a year, instead of 100 million, that's still significant revenue. Diversification? Partially. The PIF will create some returns, some tech investments will pay off, but it won't replace oil, not fully, not in time. The real question is what happens to the Saudi population. Can MBS create enough jobs to keep the youth employed and hopeful? Can he reform the culture enough to make Saudi Arabia a place where talent wants to stay instead of flee? Can he balance modernization with the conservative religious forces that still hold immense power? Because here's the truth, Vision 2030 isn't really about economics. It's about survival. It's about whether Saudi Arabia can evolve from a rentier state that lives off oil into a productive economy that creates value. And history is not kind to rentier states. Look at Venezuela. Look at Nigeria. When the resource runs out, the state collapses. Saudi Arabia has one advantage: time. They still have oil. They still have money. They still have a decade, maybe two, to get this right. But the clock is ticking louder every year. If they pull this off, if MBS actually manages to transform Saudi Arabia into a diversified, modern economy, it will be one of the greatest economic achievements in history. A kingdom that rewrote its own destiny. But if they fail, if the oil money runs out before the new economy takes root, Saudi Arabia will be a cautionary tale, a monument to hubris in the sand, a warning about what happens when you realize too late that your entire civilization was built on something that was always going to end. So, what do you think? Is Vision 2030 a realistic plan or a desperate fantasy? Are the mega projects inspiring or insane? And would you ever consider moving to Neom if they paid you enough? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you think. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the most expensive midlife crisis in history, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We cover the economics of countries gambling with their futures every week. Destroy the like button like it's a journalist asking hard questions in a Saudi consulate. And if you want to understand how Norway did this right, go watch our video on the Norwegian oil fund. It's the opposite of this story, and it's fascinating. Thanks for watching. I'm going to go sit in an air-conditioned room and be grateful I don't have to build a ski resort in the desert. See you in the next one.